The $3 million Porsche 918 Spyder sat motionless in the center of the testing floor, its engine cover raised like a dare nobody wanted to accept. Amelia Sterling, chief executive of Sterling Dynamics, told the gathered board that even the German engineers flown in from Porsche itself could not explain why the engine kept dying at the exact moment their billion-dollar contract depended on it running flawlessly. Several of the specialists exchanged a smile when Owen Carter, a maintenance technician in a faded work jacket, stepped forward carrying nothing but a flashlight and an old steel toolbox. He knelt beside the car, touched a single wire near the firewall, and asked a question that made the entire room go still. Who had serviced this vehicle the night before it first failed? Stay until the end, because the truth hidden beneath that hood would save the Porsche and topple an empire built on silence. Sterling Dynamics had spent 8 months preparing for a single private demonstration in front of representatives from Northbridge Capital, an investment fund whose signature would unlock $1.8 billion for a new generation of hybrid performance systems. Everything in the company's future depended on one car performing perfectly for 11 minutes on a closed track outside Atlanta, Georgia. That car was a silver Porsche 918 Spyder that had once belonged to Amelia's late father, the man who built the company from a two-bay garage into a firm respected across the automotive industry. Sterling Dynamics had installed an experimental control module into the vehicle's hybrid drivetrain, a system meant to prove the company could manage the transition between electric and combustion power more efficiently than any competitor on the market. For the first 2 weeks of testing, the results were extraordinary, and Amelia allowed herself to believe the hardest part of the project was already behind them. Then, 3 weeks before the scheduled demonstration, the car began to fail in a way nobody could explain. The failure never appeared on command and never repeated itself the same way twice. The car started normally every time. Every electronic readout stayed within acceptable range, the battery pack never overheated, and the combustion engine and electric motor each performed flawlessly when tested independently. But whenever the car shifted from pure electric power into the combined hybrid mode under heavy load, the entire system shut down without warning, as if some invisible hand had pulled the plug. A few minutes later, the car would restart and behave as though nothing had ever gone wrong, leaving no trace for the engineers to chase. Sterling's own team replaced sensors, rewrote software, and tested the battery pack from every possible angle, and none of it made a difference. Desperate, Amelia requested direct support from Porsche's headquarters in Germany, and within days Sebastian Cole arrived in Atlanta with 2 additional specialists at his side. Sebastian was proud, precise, and deeply trusted within the company for his encyclopedic knowledge of the vehicle's factory specifications. His team spent nearly a week running the car through every certified diagnostic sequence Porsche possessed, yet they never once produced a reliable fault code they could point to with confidence. Meanwhile, Adrian Blake, the company's chief strategy officer, had begun quietly suggesting to certain board members that Amelia had gambled the entire future of Sterling Dynamics on a project that was fundamentally unstable. He proposed delaying the demonstration, fully aware that any delay would give Northbridge Capital the legal right to walk away from the deal entirely. While the engineers argued in the testing bay, Owen was working nearby, repairing a ventilation unit just outside the room, when he heard the Porsche start and caught something the others had missed entirely. A single, almost imperceptible sound landed less than a second before the system tried to shift into hybrid mode. He stopped what he was doing, turned toward the glass wall of the testing bay, and said nothing to anyone. On his way out that evening, Owen noticed a small drop of clear liquid on the polished concrete floor near the Porsche's rear wheel. It did not smell like engine oil, and it did not smell like coolant either. He crouched down, studied it for a long moment under the overhead lights, and then wiped it away with a cloth before anyone else arrived. Whatever it was, it did not belong there, and Owen Carter had spent enough years around machines to know that liquids never appeared without a reason. The morning of the demonstration arrived with the board of directors, representatives from Northbridge Capital, and the full Porsche engineering team gathered around the testing bay in tense anticipation. The Porsche was mounted on the dynamometer, cables and sensors trailing from every access panel, and for the first run every single reading came back perfect. Amelia allowed herself a small breath of relief, convinced that the final software update had finally solved the mystery that had haunted the project for weeks. Then, as the load increased toward the threshold required for the investors to sign off, the car lost power instantly, the dashboard went dark, and the cooling fans spun down to silence in the space of a single heartbeat. The demonstration ended before it had truly begun, and the room filled with the particular kind of quiet that follows a very expensive failure. The Northbridge representatives gave Amelia exactly 2 hours to produce a credible technical explanation, warning that without one they would freeze the negotiations indefinitely. Sebastian insisted his team had already inspected every factory-certified component in the vehicle and found nothing wrong, while Lucas Bennett, the head of Sterling's research division, insisted with equal confidence that the company's own hybrid module was blameless. The two sides began, quietly and carefully, to shift responsibility onto one another, each unwilling to be the name attached to a billion-dollar failure. It was in the middle of that tension that Owen walked into the room and asked, without raising his voice, if he could take a look at the car himself. Lucas laughed before Owen finished the sentence, asking the room at large what a building maintenance technician could possibly understand that an international team of engineers had missed. That Adrian added loudly enough for the investors to hear that they were dealing with a multi-million-dollar Porsche, not some old sedan pulled out of a family garage. A ripple of laughter moved through a few of the board members, and even Amelia, though she said nothing cruel, did not believe for a moment that Owen could offer anything useful. What she did notice, almost without meaning to, was that Owen was not looking at any of the diagnostic screens at all. He was looking at the floor, at marks and smudges the rest of the room had never once considered. Owen asked how the car had been transported the night before its very first failure. Nobody answered right away. He asked next who had opened the battery compartment, since the maintenance log showed no record of that panel ever being removed. The silence that followed was heavier than the first. He pointed to a single bolt with a fresh scratch across its head, and Lucas immediately dismissed it as an ordinary sign of routine servicing, the kind of mark any technician might leave behind without thinking twice. Owen did not argue the point. He simply crouched down, opened a small access cover near the wheel well, and found a wiring clip that had been swapped for one that looked almost identical to the factory original, but was rated for a noticeably lower temperature tolerance. Sebastian examined it himself and quietly confirmed that Owen was right, though he was quick to add that a single mismatched clip could not possibly explain a total system shutdown on its own. Lucas seized on that detail immediately, using it as fresh ammunition to mock Owen's intrusion into a problem that belonged to trained engineers. Owen answered calmly that the clip was never meant to be the cause. It was there to make sure they were all looking in the wrong direction. Amelia agreed to give Owen exactly 3 minutes to examine the car, on the strict condition that he not remove any critical component without permission. He refused the diagnostic tablet offered to him and instead asked that the air conditioning, the backup generator, and every other source of ambient noise in the room be switched off entirely. With a simple flashlight, he traced the coolant lines, studied the wiring harness behind the electric motor, checked the grounding point of the low-voltage system, and examined the dust pattern around a connector that should never have been disturbed during routine maintenance. He asked Sebastian to start the car in pure electric mode without touching the accelerator, then rested his palm flat against the subframe to feel the vibration traveling through the metal itself. When the moment came to shift into hybrid mode, Owen heard a relay click twice instead of once, a sound so small that no microphone in the room had been positioned to catch it. He immediately asked for the engine to be shut down. He explained to the stunned engineers that the system had not actually broken down during operation at all. It had been forced to shut itself off after receiving 2 contradictory signals about temperature and pressure at nearly the same instant. The car's main computer only recorded the final signal it received, which meant the very first fault code vanished before it could ever be saved to memory, leaving investigators with nothing to chase. Sebastian's expression shifted from skepticism to genuine attention, because what Owen described was rare but entirely plausible under the right conditions. Lucas protested that every sensor in the system had already been replaced with new units, certain that this ruled out any possibility of tampering. Owen asked a simple question in response, wanting to know whether they had replaced the sensors themselves or only the signal wires running to them. Nobody in the room could answer. Amelia realized in that moment that her own team had assumed the sensors were the source of the fault without ever tracing the wiring back to its origin. Owen located a section of cable that had been rewrapped with unusual care, and inside its protective sheath he found a microscopic resistor, deliberately placed so that it would only alter the signal once the engine bay reached a very specific temperature. That single detail explained everything, why the car performed flawlessly during short tests but failed consistently under heavy sustained load, exactly the condition a real demonstration would require. Lucas suggested it might be nothing more than a forgotten piece of prototype wiring left over from an earlier experiment, still unwilling to accept what the evidence suggested. Owen pointed to the solder joint itself, made by hand with an alloy that had never once been used inside a Porsche factory. This was not a manufacturing defect. This was a deliberate act of interference. When Catherine Reed, the company's lead legal counsel, pulled the security logs from that section of the building, she discovered that 17 full minutes of camera footage from the testing bay had been deleted without explanation. Amelia ordered the testing bay sealed and instructed her staff to say nothing to the investors until they understood what they were truly dealing with. Adrian objected immediately, arguing that raising the word sabotage without solid proof would only spread panic through the board, and he suggested instead that they quietly blame a defective aftermarket part and close the internal investigation before it went any further. Owen continued studying the tampered wire, and something about the placement of the resistor and the careful wrapping around it reminded him of a technique he had encountered years earlier during durability testing on an entirely different hybrid platform overseas. Sebastian asked him directly where he had learned that kind of method, and Owen deflected the question, saying only that he had once worked around systems built along similar lines. Lucas, suspicious and a little embarrassed by his earlier dismissiveness, quietly pulled Owen's personnel file to see what he was truly dealing with. The file listed nothing more than a technical associate's degree and a string of jobs at small independent repair shops, which only reinforced Lucas's assumption that Owen had been exaggerating his own experience. Sebastian, however, later found Owen's name buried inside an old technical research paper, listed as a co-author on a patent describing a mechanism for transferring energy between a combustion engine and an electric motor with remarkable efficiency. The patent had been registered years earlier under the name of a components supplier that no longer existed, having quietly folded not long after the filing. When Amelia confronted him directly, Owen finally admitted the truth. He had once been a development engineer working on hybrid drivetrain systems for a European supplier, a job that had once defined his entire professional identity. Years earlier, he had discovered that a superior at that company was hiding a serious safety flaw in a prototype vehicle undergoing testing, and when Owen refused to sign off on a report he knew to be false, the company found a way to place the blame on him instead, ending his career in the industry almost overnight. During that same difficult period, his wife passed away, and Owen returned to the United States determined to find work that would let him raise his daughter without the crushing pressure that had once defined his professional life. He had no interest in reliving that chapter of his life and made it clear to Amelia that his current value should never be measured against the reputation he had left behind. Amelia began to see him differently after that conversation, though Owen warned her against trusting him simply because of an old patent with his name attached to it. He told her plainly that trust should be built on evidence, not on sentiment, and that she owed him nothing beyond a fair chance to prove what he could actually do. Catherine's investigation soon turned up something far more troubling, discovering that the command used to disable the security cameras had been issued from Lucas's own user account inside the building's network. Lucas insisted he had never touched the system, visibly shaken by the accusation, yet the login records clearly traced the action back to a terminal inside his own office. When Owen examined the computer in Lucas's office himself, he found a small keystroke recording device hidden discreetly behind one of the connection ports on the back of the tower. Owen removed the fraudulent resistor from the wiring harness and restored the section of cable to its original factory specification, though he remained convinced that a single hidden component could not fully explain everything they had witnessed. Whoever had built this scheme had invested far too much time and precision to settle for fault that could be discovered after only a few careful inspections. Amelia now had to decide whether to move forward with the postponed demonstration at all, and Northbridge agreed, reluctantly, to grant one final extension until the following morning on the condition of a live test run witnessed in person. Adrian pushed hard for Amelia to proceed without hesitation, warning her that any further delay would be read by the board as proof she no longer had the authority to lead the company through this crisis. Owen requested a full inspection of the fuel and cooling systems before anyone attempted to run the car again, and Lucas immediately argued that such an inspection would require at least 2 full days to complete properly. Amelia gave Owen 6 hours instead, a decision that surprised nearly everyone in the room, including Owen himself. During that inspection, he identified the clear liquid he had first noticed on the floor days earlier as a specialized thermal fluid, one that could only leak from a single coolant line feeding the vehicle's power inverter. The line itself was not punctured or damaged in any obvious way. A single fitting had simply been loosened just enough to leak only once pressure rose to a certain level under load. Owen explained that if the car continued running under heavy load without correction, the inverter would eventually overheat to a dangerous degree, potentially causing far more serious damage than a simple shutdown. The fraudulent resistor, he realized, had actually been forcing the system to shut itself off before that temperature could ever be reached, functioning less like a weapon and more like a safety valve for whoever had built this scheme. Whoever was behind the sabotage clearly wanted the car to fail publicly and humiliate the company, but did not want it to catch fire or injure anyone during the earlier, less critical stages of the plan. Owen concluded there had to be a second phase to this scheme, something designed to activate only once the first layer of failure had already been discovered and corrected. When the technical team inspected the coolant reservoir more closely, they discovered a small quantity of corrosive chemical had been added directly into the fluid itself. After several heating and cooling cycles, that chemical would slowly break down the rubber seals inside the cooling system, eventually causing a much larger and far more dangerous leak. Owen laid out the sequence as he understood it, a plan built in careful, deliberate stages. First, the random shutdowns would destroy confidence in the entire project. Then, once the electrical fault was corrected and the team believed the danger had passed, the car would begin running normally again, lulling everyone into a false sense of security. Finally, during the decisive demonstration itself, the cooling system would fail catastrophically, and a serious incident in front of the investors would be more than enough to see Amelia removed from leadership entirely. That same afternoon, Catherine uncovered evidence that Adrian had quietly acquired shares through a shell company that stood to profit enormously if Sterling Dynamics collapsed in value. Amelia's first instinct was to call the police immediately and suspend Adrian from his position without delay. But Catherine urged patience, reminding her that the financial evidence alone did not yet prove he had personally sabotaged the vehicle. If Adrian realized he was under suspicion, he would have more than enough time to destroy whatever evidence remained before anyone could act on it. Owen suggested they leave the car looking exactly as it had before, allowing their opponent to believe the technical team was still hopelessly stuck, unable to identify the true cause of the failures. Amelia found herself genuinely surprised by how naturally Owen thought several steps ahead, and he explained simply that machines and people both leave traces whenever they are forced to behave against their true design. The two of them worked through the night inside the sealed testing bay, and somewhere in those quiet hours, Amelia admitted that the Porsche was the last object that still connected her to her late father. He had once told her that a good leader did not need to have every answer, but always needed to recognize who was telling the truth in a room full of confident voices. After taking over the company, Amelia confessed she had slowly grown more closed off, trusting only the people who carried impressive titles and polished credentials rather than the evidence itself. Owen did not criticize her for it, only observing quietly that pressure has a way of making people mistake confidence for competence, a mistake he had once made himself, long before either of them had met. Amelia asked him, almost hesitantly, why he had never tried to reclaim his old career after everything that happened. Owen told her that after so many difficult years he no longer felt any need to prove he was the smartest person in the room. He only wanted to reach the end of his life never having signed his name to something he knew in his heart was wrong. He mentioned briefly, almost in passing, that he had a daughter depending on him, a detail he offered without elaboration and never returned to again that night. It was enough, though, for Amelia to understand that Owen was not driven by recklessness or the pursuit of glory. Every choice he made carried the quiet weight of someone else's future resting on it. Together they built a small, independent data logging system that ran entirely outside the company's main network, immune to anyone with access to internal accounts. Owen placed tiny tamper seals at several critical points throughout the vehicle, invisible unless someone knew exactly where to look, designed to reveal instantly if anyone attempted to interfere again. Amelia announced publicly, and rather convincingly, that the demonstration would proceed as scheduled, and that the technical team still had not identified the cause of the failures. Adrian appeared visibly, almost carelessly, satisfied by that news. Later that same night, the independent sensor system Owen had installed quietly recorded that someone had entered the sealed testing bay. The hidden camera captured Lucas walking into the room, but something in the way he moved, tense and hesitant, suggested he was not acting entirely of his own free will. The next morning, Amelia and Catherine intercepted Lucas as he was leaving the testing bay, his hands visibly shaking as he tried to walk past them without meeting their eyes. Under quiet but firm questioning, Lucas admitted that Adrian had been holding evidence of an old mistake over his head for months, a moment years earlier when Lucas had quietly altered a set of test results so a struggling project could pass a critical review. Adrian had discovered that failure long ago and had used it ever since to keep Lucas compliant, extracting small favors whenever it suited his purposes. Lucas confessed that he had given Adrian access to the sealed testing bay and a copy of the inspection schedule, though he insisted almost desperately that he had never personally installed anything designed to sabotage the car. Before Lucas could formally put any of this into a written statement, Adrian moved first, striking back with a plan of his own. He forwarded an old personnel record to the board of directors, one showing that Owen had once been accused, years earlier, of sabotaging a prototype vehicle at his former company overseas. Adrian argued, calmly and persuasively, that Owen had likely tampered with the Porsche himself in order to manufacture a crisis, only to stage a dramatic discovery afterward and rebuild the reputation he had lost so many years before. He pointed out, with practiced precision, that Owen had been alone near the vehicle even before the mysterious liquid on the floor was first noticed. The board of directors, alarmed and under enormous pressure, ordered Owen suspended immediately and instructed security to escort him from the building without delay. Sebastian did not believe the accusation for a moment, but without solid proof of his own, he had nothing concrete to offer in Owen's defense. Amelia now faced an impossible choice, knowing that if she publicly defended Owen, the board might move to suspend her as well, mere hours before the most important demonstration of her career. Owen offered no protest and made no attempt to plead his case. He simply handed Amelia his toolbox and the independent data drive they had built together, along with one final warning that the car was still not entirely safe. He cautioned her that whoever had sabotaged the vehicle might have installed a purely mechanical mechanism, something that would never register on any electronic system no matter how thoroughly they searched. Amelia allowed security to walk him out, and for a moment Owen genuinely believed she had chosen to side with the board over him. The instant he was gone, Adrian moved quickly, ordering the car prepared immediately for the following morning's decisive run. But once the room had emptied, Amelia quietly locked the door to her office, called Catherine inside, and asked her to lay out every single piece of financial evidence they had gathered so far. Amelia told the board, in a voice that left no room for argument, that suspending Owen had only been a way to draw him out of Adrian's line of sight while they finished building their case. Later that night, when Catherine opened the independent data drive Owen had left behind, they discovered a short audio recording that captured the faint, unmistakable sound of a piece of metal shifting somewhere inside the fuel tank. Amelia arranged for Owen to be quietly brought back into the building through a rear service entrance, away from anyone who might report his return to Adrian. Owen explained that the sound on the recording had never come from the fuel pump at all, but from a small object moving in direct response to the car's acceleration, something no diagnostic system had ever been designed to detect. Under his direction, the technical team carefully removed the fuel tank assembly, following his instructions with a precision they had dismissed as unnecessary only days before. Inside, hidden within a modified auxiliary line, they found a small steel ball resting quietly in a channel that had clearly been altered on purpose. When the car sat still or moved gently, the ball remained harmless, tucked away in a position that never interfered with normal operation. But under hard acceleration, the ball slid forward and restricted the flow of fuel just enough to disrupt the engine, causing the combustion side to lose pressure for a fraction of a second while the hybrid system scrambled to compensate, producing exactly the kind of chaotic signal cascade that had baffled every engineer who tried to diagnose it. Once the car slowed down again, the ball returned quietly to its original position, and fuel pressure recovered before the system could ever record a clean, traceable fault. That single detail explained everything that had frustrated the engineers for weeks. The diagnostic equipment never found a fixed, repeatable failure because there wasn't one to find. Every individual component passed every certified test performed on the lift. The failure only appeared under real-world acceleration, a condition that no static bench test could ever replicate. Porsche's own engineering team had focused entirely on software and factory-certified hardware, never imagining that someone had hidden a purely mechanical trap deep inside a fuel line that had been deliberately altered from the inside. Sebastian openly credited Owen's discovery as something that fell entirely outside the boundaries of standard diagnostic procedure. He felt no wounded pride in admitting it, only genuine respect for the way Owen had combined physics, sound, and years of hands-on instinct into a method no manual could ever teach. Owen pointed out, however, that the steel ball could not have found its way into the system on its own. Whoever installed it needed detailed engineering drawings of the Porsche and a precise copy of the testing schedule to know exactly when and how to strike. Catherine soon confirmed that Adrian's shell company had quietly hired a former technician who had once worked on the vehicle's maintenance years earlier, disguising every payment to him as an ordinary consulting fee. Amelia wanted to have Adrian arrested that very night, but Owen suggested they allow him to take one final step before confronting him. They needed proof, spoken in his own words, that he understood exactly how the sabotage mechanism worked. The team quietly replaced the steel ball with a harmless simulated device and reassembled every part of the car exactly as it had been, restoring the cooling system fully to its original specification. Owen installed a tiny concealed recorder inside the engine bay, small enough to escape notice even under close inspection. Amelia informed the full board that the Porsche had been repaired and that the final demonstration would proceed exactly as scheduled the next morning. Adrian appeared calm on the surface, but he was seen quietly stepping away to make a phone call, asking someone in a low, tense voice why the second mechanism had not activated as planned. That call was recorded in full. Even so, Adrian never used language direct enough to constitute an outright confession, choosing his words carefully and speaking only in vague, deniable phrases. Catherine knew they would need something far more explicit before any of this could hold up beyond the walls of Sterling Dynamics. The next morning, Adrian requested permission to personally inspect the Porsche one final time before the demonstration began, arriving with a small tool that did not belong to any kit issued by Sterling Dynamics. The final demonstration took place on Sterling Dynamics' private test track, with representatives from Northbridge Capital, the full board of directors, Sebastian, and the rest of the technical team gathered along the perimeter fence in tense silence. Adrian still believed he had one last chance to force the car into failure before the world was watching too closely to hide it. Under the pretense of a routine safety check, he opened the engine access panel and began searching for something specific, his movements quick and increasingly desperate. The hidden camera captured every second of it, showing Adrian searching for the steel ball in exactly the spot where it should have been. When he failed to find it, his composure cracked, and he reached instead to loosen an entirely different connector, his hands trembling with barely controlled panic. Owen stepped out from behind the vehicle and asked evenly exactly what he was looking for. Adrian spun around and immediately accused Owen of setting a trap for him, his voice rising with a desperation that betrayed far more than his words intended. Amelia and Catherine arrived a moment later, and Catherine asked Adrian, calmly but pointedly, how he had known the precise location of a mechanism that had never once been publicly disclosed to anyone outside their small circle. Adrian tried to walk away, but the security team already stationed nearby blocked his path without hesitation. He continued to insist that he had only been checking the vehicle based on a hunch, nothing more than professional caution. Catherine played the recorded phone call for everyone present and laid out the documented payments made to the former technician who had helped install the sabotage. Lucas stepped forward as well, formally confirming that Adrian had coerced him into providing access and had falsified login credentials to cover his tracks. Cornered on every side, Adrian finally declared that Amelia had been steadily weakening the company by pouring resources into a project driven more by sentiment than sound judgment, and that sabotaging a single car was, in his mind, a small price to pay to save Sterling Dynamics from her leadership. Those words, spoken aloud in front of witnesses, became the confession Catherine had been waiting for all along. Adrian was removed from the test track and held for the authorities who arrived shortly after. Yet the contract itself was still far from secure, since the Northbridge representatives now understood that an internal conspiracy of this scale pointed to a serious failure in the company's governance. Amelia could easily have chosen to bury the entire episode to protect the deal, but instead she chose to lay out the full truth in front of everyone gathered on the track that morning. She admitted openly that too much authority had been concentrated in the hands of too few people, that warnings from lower-level employees had routinely been dismissed without a second thought, and that reports carrying a senior signature had been trusted far too easily, without anyone bothering to verify them against reality. She acknowledged that the culture inside her company had quietly come to value titles over evidence, a mistake that had nearly cost them everything. Amelia did not ask the investors to overlook what had happened. She asked instead that they judge Sterling Dynamics by how honestly the company responded once the truth had finally come to light. Then, at last, the true test began. Sebastian offered Owen a seat beside the driver for the run, but Owen declined, insisting the demonstration needed to unfold exactly according to protocol rather than turning into a personal spectacle built around him. The Porsche accelerated smoothly down the track, its transition from electric to hybrid power seamless and controlled. Power climbed steadily past the exact threshold that had once caused the entire system to collapse without warning. The temperature held firmly within its proper range. Fuel pressure never wavered even once. The car completed the entire testing sequence without a single interruption, gliding back toward the observation area with its engine running as smoothly as the day it first rolled off the factory line. Sebastian walked directly over to Owen, shook his hand firmly in front of the entire assembled crowd, and declared that the failure had never been a matter of Porsche's engineers lacking skill. They had failed only because they had gone looking for a technical flaw, when the truth all along had been the unmistakable trace of a human hand. The Northbridge representatives agreed to move forward with the full contract, though they insisted on one condition, that Sterling Dynamics overhaul its entire safety and oversight structure from the ground up. A few days later, Adrian was formally charged with property sabotage, securities fraud, coercion of an employee, and conspiracy to manipulate the value of the company he once served. Lucas voluntarily resigned from his position as head of research, agreeing to cooperate fully with the ongoing investigation and accepting full responsibility for the reports he had signed without ever verifying them himself. Amelia did not hide Lucas's failures from the board, but she allowed him the chance to enter a professional ethics program once his legal obligations had been fully satisfied. Sebastian filed his formal report back to Germany, crediting Owen directly as the person who had identified the true root cause of the failure. Porsche's leadership soon extended an offer inviting Owen to join their organization in a senior technical advisory role. Around the same time, Amelia offered him something different, the opportunity to lead a newly created division inside Sterling Dynamics focused entirely on safety verification and failure analysis. Owen did not answer either offer right away. He had no desire to return to an environment where impressive titles could once again let people forget where their real responsibilities began, and Amelia understood his hesitation without needing further explanation. Rather than promise him that Sterling Dynamics had transformed overnight, she handed him a detailed reform plan built on concrete, enforceable principles. Every employee would have the authority to halt testing the moment they identified a genuine safety concern, regardless of their rank. Technical warnings would be evaluated strictly on evidence, never on seniority. No single individual would ever again control the entirety of the company's security data alone. Engineering teams would rotate through direct hands-on work in the shop rather than remaining isolated behind desks, and anyone who signed off on a report would bear real responsibility for verifying it against the physical truth of the machine itself. Owen's old record was formally and publicly restored, clearing his name once and for all after years of quiet doubt hanging over it. He agreed to accept the new position on a 6-month trial basis, wanting time to see whether the company's promises would hold up under ordinary pressure rather than the extraordinary circumstances of a single crisis. He asked only to keep his original toolbox close at hand and to spend part of each week working directly on the shop floor instead of confined entirely to an office. Amelia agreed without hesitation, understanding exactly why that mattered to him. Once the Porsche had been fully restored to its original condition, Amelia invited Owen to join her for its very first drive on a public road since the entire ordeal had begun. Somewhere along that quiet stretch of highway, she admitted that what shamed her most was not the failure to identify the fault in time. It was the memory of laughing along with everyone else the moment Owen first approached the car. Owen told her that an apology only carries real weight once it changes how a person treats the next individual who walks through the door in a similar position. Amelia answered that from that day forward, no employee at Sterling Dynamics would ever need an impressive title just to be taken seriously. Whatever was growing between them remained careful and unhurried, built from nothing more dramatic than trust, mutual respect, and quiet conversations that lingered long after the workday had officially ended. In the final scene, Amelia and Owen stood together inside the newly reorganized shop, where the walls no longer displayed portraits of executives but instead carried a single handwritten principle for everyone to see. Evidence carries no rank. Owen closed the engine cover of the Porsche after one last inspection, the same careful motion he had performed the very first day this story began. Amelia asked whether he was certain everything was finally truly fine. Owen listened to the engine idle for a few quiet seconds before answering that the car was fine now. This time, though, no one in the room laughed before he finished speaking.